Have you ever felt like someone knows you too well? That they seem to predict your moves, anticipate your decisions, use your own words against you? It's not intuition. It's not coincidence. It's strategic observation. And while you live your life without filters, there are calculating minds studying you like someone analyzing a map before conquering territory. Machiavelli knew this 500 years ago. Power doesn't belong to the strongest, but to whoever best reads others' weaknesses. In this video, you're going to discover the 7 mental patterns used by those who observe you in silence, how to identify when you're being studied, and the 3 mental shielding techniques that only strategists know. But if you stay until the end, I'm going to reveal the most dangerous thought of all, the one they use to turn your own personality into their control tool. This isn't paranoia, it's preparation. Because in a world where everyone shows everything, whoever protects themselves first governs later. Stay, because after this you're going to see conversations in a completely different way. While you talk, they archive. Every casual comment you make about your childhood, every time you mention what bothers you, every personal story you share thinking you're just being social. For you, it's a conversation. For them, it's an intelligence session. Robert had a co-worker who always seemed interested in his stories. He asked about his family, his work frustrations, his weekend plans. Robert thought he had found a friend until in an important meeting, that same co-worker used personal information against him, exposing his insecurities in front of the boss in such a subtle way that Robert couldn't defend himself without seeming paranoid. The first mental rule of whoever studies you, your need to be heard, is their most valuable raw material. They're not seeking intimacy, they're seeking information, and every time you open your mouth without strategic filter, you're handing them the keys to your vulnerability. Ask yourself right now, who have you talked too much with lately? What personal information have you shared that could be used against you? Because whoever collects in silence attacks with precision. They don't just listen to what you say, they observe how you react. They throw out apparently innocent comments to measure your responses. They mention certain people to see if you tense your jaw. They suggest ideas to observe if your energy changes. They criticize something they know you defend to study the intensity of your response. Every reaction of yours is data they store for future use. Laura worked with someone who constantly made comments about women's physical appearance in the office. Laura always reacted with visible discomfort, thinking she was defending her principles. One day she realized the truth. That person had identified exactly what disturbed her and used it to destabilize her before important meetings. The tactic was simple: make a sexist comment right before a presentation so Laura would enter agitated, less concentrated, less effective. The second strategic thought: your emotional reactions are your access code. Whoever deciphers what disturbs you has the power to disturb you when you most need to stay calm. Immediate exercise. For the next 3 days, before reacting to any provocative comment, ask yourself, why are they telling me this now? What could they gain from my reaction? Because whoever controls your emotions controls your performance. They study your routines like a detective studies a crime scene. What time you arrive when you take breaks, at what moments you're more or less energetic, when you're most vulnerable to interruptions. They identify your emotional cycles, the days you come motivated, the weeks you're stressed, the moments when your attention disperses. For them, your routine isn't convenience, it's approach strategy. Miguel had a boss who always asked him for additional favors on Friday afternoons, right when Miguel was anxious to finish the week. At first he thought it was coincidence until he realized the pattern. His boss had identified the exact moment when Miguel was most likely to say yes to avoid conflicts and get out of the office quickly. Result: Miguel always ended up committing to extra work he didn't want to do. The third mental pattern: your predictability is their tactical advantage. Whoever knows your weakness schedules can attack when your resistance is low. Immediate action. Change something in your routine this week without warning. Arrive at a different time, take your break at another moment, alter your availability. Observe if someone comments on the change or seems uncomfortable with your unpredictability. Because whoever depends on your routine to manipulate you will reveal themselves when that routine breaks. They don't just study you, they study your complete ecosystem. Who influences you, who you respect, from whom you need approval, with whom you have unresolved conflicts. They identify your power circle and your relational tension points, because attacking you directly is primitive. What's sophisticated is using your own network of relationships to influence you. Carmen had a friend who always seemed to know exactly what to say about other people in her social circle. Comments that planted doubts, gossip that created distance, suggestions that altered group dynamics. Carmen took months to realize that this friend had perfectly mapped her relational insecurities and used them to position herself as the most trustworthy person in the group, systematically eliminating social competition. The fourth strategic thought: your relationships are your vulnerable territory. Whoever maps your network of affections can reorganize it for their convenience. Observe if someone in your life always has information about others, if they frequently plant seeds of doubt about people close to you, if they seem to enjoy being the messenger of others' conflicts, because whoever plays with your social circle is playing with you. But there's something even more sinister, and it's how they use your own value system against you. And we'll see that now, because the next pattern is perhaps the most manipulative of all. They identify what's sacred to you and turn it into a pressure lever. If you value loyalty, they'll make you feel disloyal for setting boundaries. If you prioritize justice, they'll use apparently unjust situations to manipulate your decisions. If you care about helping others, they'll create false emergencies that require your sacrifice. Your principles, which should protect you, become their persuasion tools. Diego was a man of solid principles. He always helped whoever needed it, never abandoned a commitment, detested injustices. His business partner had perfectly identified these values and used them systematically. Every time Diego wanted to renegotiate unfavorable terms, his partner reminded him how much he had helped him in the past, making him feel ungrateful. When Diego wanted to take vacations, he created situations where his absence would seem like team abandonment. The result: Diego worked more, earned less, and felt guilty every time he prioritized his own interests. The fifth mental pattern: your values are your programming software. Whoever identifies your moral code can execute commands in your behavior. Self-defense exercise. Make a list of your 3 most important values. Then ask yourself, does someone in my life use these values to ask me for things I don't want to do? Do I feel guilty when I act in my own interest because it contradicts these principles? Because a value without limits isn't virtue, it's programmed vulnerability. They study what you want, what you need, where you're moving toward. Not to help you achieve it, but to position themselves as necessary intermediaries between you and your objectives. They identify your dreams to become the guardians of their realization, or to sabotage them in a way that you can't blame them directly. Elena wanted to be promoted in her company and had talked about it with several colleagues, including her apparent mentor, Sandra. Sandra always showed support, gave her advice, included her in visible projects. But every time Elena was close to really standing out, Sandra subtly redirected credit toward herself or planted doubts about Elena's preparation for the next level. Elena took 2 years to understand that Sandra wasn't her mentor, she was her undercover saboteur. She had perfectly identified Elena's ambitions and used them to keep her in a position of eternal dependence. The sixth strategic thought: your ambitions are your predictable direction. Whoever knows where you're going can block your path while appearing to help you walk. Immediate reflection: with whom have you shared your most important objectives? Does that person really celebrate your advances or always find subtle ways to minimize your achievements? Do you feel more or less confident after talking with them about your plans? Because whoever feeds on your dreams will never want you to wake up completely. The cruelest pattern of all. They identify what you lack: confidence, experience, connections, resources, validation. And instead of helping you develop those areas, they ensure you remain dependent on them to compensate for those deficiencies. They keep you needing them eternally. Carlos felt insecure about his leadership capacity and had mentioned this in confidence to his supervisor, Ricardo. Instead of helping Carlos develop that skill, Ricardo systematically excluded him from real leadership opportunities while giving him responsibilities that made him seem like a leader without developing his real capacity. Result: Carlos remained insecure, dependent on Ricardo for validation, and Ricardo maintained a talented but unconfident subordinate under his total control. The seventh and most ruthless mental pattern: your deficiencies are their power insurance. Whoever identifies what you lack can ensure you never develop it completely. Brutal self-evaluation. Is there someone in your life who's always available to help you with something specific, but never seems interested in you learning to do it yourself? Someone who knows exactly where you feel vulnerable and always appears as the solution but never as the teacher. Because whoever becomes indispensable through your weaknesses has incentives for those weaknesses to persist. You already know the 7 patterns, but now comes the most important part: how to shield yourself without becoming paranoid. The first defense against whoever studies you is controlling what information is available to be studied. Like an iceberg, only show 10% of yourself on the surface. The remaining 90% stays submerged, protected, inaccessible to outside eyes. This doesn't mean being fake, it means being strategically selective. Maria implemented the iceberg principle after realizing her boss used every personal conversation to find ways to pressure her. She stopped sharing her family concerns, her weekend plans, her opinions about co-workers. In public, she was cordial and professional. In private, she kept her personal life completely separate from the work environment. Result: her boss no longer had material to manipulate her, and Maria began to be respected differently, with an authority that comes from controlled mystery. Practical implementation. For the next 2 weeks before sharing any personal information in casual conversations, ask yourself, does this person need to know this? How could this information be used against me? Am I talking for genuine connection or from a need to be heard? Mental shielding begins by recognizing that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, and that vulnerability without criteria isn't authenticity, it's strategic imprudence. If someone studies you, study them back, but do it with more sophistication. Observe not just what they say, but when they say it, how their behavior changes according to context, what information they seek from you, and how they use it afterward. Become an investigator of their methods. Paolo noticed that his teammate always asked personal questions after stressful meetings when Paolo had his guard down. He also observed that this teammate never shared personal information himself, always redirected conversations toward Paolo. Instead of confronting him, Paolo began strategically giving him false information. He mentioned a personal project that didn't exist, expressed invented concerns, shared fictitious plans. In a few weeks, Paolo could identify exactly how and when this information was used against him, confirming his suspicions and giving him concrete evidence of manipulation. Implementation technique. Choose a person you suspect studies you. For a week, mentally document every interaction: what questions they ask you, what information they seek, how they react when you don't get what they're looking for, if they mention information that only you had given them. Then, conduct a controlled experiment. Share false but plausible information and observe if it reappears somehow in future conversations or situations where they could use it against you. Reverse observation gives you power because it turns their game into your investigation. Whoever studies you counts on you being predictable. Your routine, your reactions, your behavior patterns. Break that predictability intentionally and irregularly. It's not about being erratic, but about being strategically unpredictable at key moments. Antonio had identified that his supervisor always assigned him additional tasks on Fridays because he knew Antonio didn't want to generate conflicts before the weekend. Instead of confronting directly, Antonio began altering his Fridays. Some days he left early without warning. Other days he completely changed his attitude and showed willingness to work late. Occasionally he pretended to have important plans he couldn't cancel. In a few weeks, his supervisor stopped using that pattern because he could no longer predict Antonio's response. Calculated unpredictability worked as psychological deterrence. Immediate application. Identify a pattern in your behavior that someone could be exploiting. It could be your arrival time, your availability for favors, your reaction to certain provocations, your way of handling crises. For the next 3 weeks, alter that pattern irregularly. Sometimes do it the same, sometimes do it completely different, other times do it partially different. The key is that there's no new predictable pattern, but a variability that makes it impossible to plan attacks on your behavior. Whoever can't predict you can't manipulate you with the same efficiency. And now we arrive at the most sinister thought of all, the one I promised to reveal to you. Those who study you with true sophistication don't just seek to manipulate you occasionally. Their final objective is to create a system where you depend on them in such a way that you can't distance yourself without considerable pain. Emotional, professional, social or economic dependency engineering. They make you need their approval, their resources, their presence, their validation. And once that dependency is installed, they can control you without it seeming like control. Fernanda worked for a small company where her boss, apparently generous, always helped her with personal problems. He lent her money when she had troubles, gave her flexibility when she had family emergencies, included her in social events where she met contacts important for her career. At first, Fernanda felt lucky to have such an understanding boss. It took her years to realize that each favor created an emotional debt that her boss collected in terms of blind loyalty, unpaid overtime, and silence in the face of questionable company practices. When she finally wanted to quit, she discovered that her boss had structured her life in such a way that distancing herself would mean losing not just the job, but her social network, her economic stability, and her professional reputation in the industry. That's dependency engineering, creating a system where your freedom has a cost that seems too high to pay. Dependency engineering is insidious because it disguises itself as generosity, mentorship, or genuine love. But it has unmistakable signs you must recognize before it's too late. First sign: there's always a hidden emotional price for the help received. They help you, but afterward, they constantly remind you what they did for you, especially when you want to make independent decisions. Second sign: they systematically discourage your autonomy. Every time you show capacity to handle something on your own, they find reasons for you to continue needing their intervention. Third sign: they control your access to alternatives. They subtly distance you from other sources of support, other mentors, other opportunities, other relationships that could reduce your dependence on them. Fourth sign: your personal growth always requires their participation. They never teach you to fish. They always give you the fish. They maintain your competence at a level that makes you functional but never completely independent. Fifth sign: when you try to distance yourself or establish boundaries, the response is disproportionately intense. Guilt, emotional manipulation, veiled threats, or sudden changes in the treatment you receive. Immediate reflection: is there someone in your life from whom you feel you can't distance yourself without disproportionate consequences? Someone who has been very generous with you, but each favor seems to generate a debt you never finish paying? Someone who always finds reasons why you're still not ready to handle certain things on your own? If the answer is yes, you could be a victim of dependency engineering. If you identified that someone has created artificial dependency in your life, liberation must be gradual and strategic. An abrupt distancing could activate all the consequences that were designed to keep you tied. The strategy is called dependency diversification. First, identify in what specific areas you depend on this person: emotional, economic, social, professional, practical. Second, for each area, discreetly seek alternative sources of support. Don't eliminate the original dependency immediately, just create parallel options. Third, gradually reduce your vulnerability in each area, one at a time, without announcing your strategy. Fourth, rebuild your autonomy so that eventual separation is your choice, not your desperate need. Gregorio applied this strategy with a mentor who had created total dependency on his professional development. For 8 months, Gregorio secretly built relationships with other mentors, developed skills that his original mentor had always handled for him, saved money to reduce economic dependency, and expanded his social network outside the circle controlled by this person. When he finally established clear boundaries, he did it from a position of strength, not need. The mentor tried to activate the usual consequences, but discovered that Gregorio was no longer vulnerable to them. Gradual liberation works because it changes the balance of power without provoking a crisis you might not be prepared to handle. It's the master's strategy, leaving the game without the opponent realizing you're no longer playing by their rules. You've learned to recognize the 7 mental patterns of those who study you in silence, the 3 mental shielding techniques, and the most dangerous thought of all, dependency engineering. But knowing these strategies isn't enough. Real power is in implementing them consistently until they become your second nature. Because in a world where personal information is power, and where every vulnerability you show can be archived and used against you, mental protection isn't paranoia. It's strategic survival. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago. It's not enough to be good, you have to be intelligent. It's not enough to have talent, you have to know how to protect it. It's not enough to trust, you have to know in whom. If this video activated something in your mind, a discomfort, a suspicion, a painful recognition of situations you're living right now, then you can never go back. Awareness of these patterns turns you into someone different. Leave me a word in the comments that represents your biggest discovery in this video. Vigilance, shielding, liberation, or the word that best captures what you now understand about your own life. And if you recognized someone specific while listening to this, if you identified patterns that are happening in your life right now, subscribe, because on this channel you don't come to be entertained, you come to be mentally shielded. The next video will be even deeper. The technique they use to make you feel guilty about your own boundaries. Because whoever dominates guilt dominates will, and you will no longer be dominated. Hit like if this changed your perspective, because the algorithm needs to know that this content transforms lives, and your like is the signal that you're ready for the next level of strategic consciousness.